All right, today is Sunday, February 24th, 2008, and we are at my grandparents' house in Leo, Indiana, conducting this interview today. I'm interviewing my grandfather, Andrew Gall, and his birth date is November 26, 1921. And myself, I'm Daniel Gall, and my grandfather, Andrew Gall, are here, and we're recording this interview today. Before we get started, let me ask you, just for the record, which war we're going to discuss today and what branch of service you served in.
Well, at that time it was called the Army Air Force. Later on it became its own service. So that was, what was the other question?
What war were we talking about?
World War II.
World War II, yeah.
World War II.
All right. What was your rank? What was the highest rank you achieved during your service?
First lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
Yeah. I was supposed to be get out as captain, but they lost my first lieutenant record, so I couldn't get promoted. So I left as first lieutenant.
Okay. And where was it that you served during most of the war?
Out of England, European theater.
Okay. And where were you based?
In England, Norwich. Northeastern part of Britain.
And what type of work did you do? What was your position?
Well, I was a navigator on the B-24 bomber. Of course, I went through all that, the training, cadet training, and pre-flighting, and actually I almost became I actually started out in piloting, but there was no opening in the school at the time or something, and I so ended up that there was an opening in navigation, so I went in there. The best I remember.
All right. And what are the papers that you have? Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
This is my military record and the report of separation from the service. It shows me date of entry into active duty is September 1943, and my military rank and occupation was navigator, and my combat area was air offensive Europe, Normandy. Normandy was the time of Normandy. What else is there on the record here? Basically, I ended up, before I left the service, I was a navigation instructor for cadets before before I left service. It's all on here mainly, I think.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about how you became enlisted and a little bit about your training and where you trained?
Well, excuse me, the enlisting, I was working in New York City, and one weekend, just walking down somewhere in Brooklyn, I overheard this radio broadcast about the Japanese invading Pearl Harbor, and I almost immediately turned around and said, "Well, I'm going to go back home and enlist." You know, that was the first thought. I said, "Hey, you know, we're going to war." So I enlisted, and then, of course, I decided that as now as I was going to enlist, I could either be a foot soldier or I could maybe try for something more than that. And so I decided when this was just before I enlisted, decided that I would see if I could pass the exams for Air Force for cadet training. If you're going to go in, may as well, you know, go for the most sought after branch, the Air Force at the time. And I don't know what else I could say about that, is that I have to go through physicals and mental exams, physical exams, just to be able to join and then take the cadet examinations took over a week of just the testing. They were real fussy about who they were going to let fly and go navigating bombers, I guess.
So where did you do your training?
Well, let's see. That's why I should have wrote some notes. But just basic training, just military training, was in Fort Dix, New Jersey, waiting for my cadet appointment, which I finally got, and then they transferred me to Texas, and took another, I think I mentioned, about a week of physicals and exams, whatever, and then passed all that and was assigned to. They gave me a choice of either. They said that I qualified for pilot, navigator, or bombardier. So I said, well, I may as well. I said I've never really flown a plane, but I'd like to start with piloting. But if for some reason or other, either piloting didn't agree with me and vice versa, I wanted to be sure that I had another choice. So they put down my record that I actually asked for navigation. So later on, when I went through pilot training, somewhere in the process, I decided to switch to navigation, and which is what I wanted to do in the first place. So that's how I ended up at navigation school, got that training, got my commission as a second lieutenant as a navigator, and then of course get assigned to some bomb group someplace, and this was in Idaho, I think, and 3 phases of training. There were 3 phases, and the third one was for training for combat type of thing. Trying to think of an experience there, because you asked me for some experience. Well, I recall that our departure base was going to be in Florida, and we were in Texas, I think it was Texas at the time, and so I remember. I'm trying to remember that's why I said I should have some more notes. But I remember visiting home before going, and getting, and then I should have mentioned that I was assigned to a crew as navigator, and I actually had combat training as a crew, and then we were assigned to a group, a bomb group, and then we were assigned to European theater. And
so did you stay with that crew during the entire?
Yeah, once I was assigned to the crew, I stayed we changed a few people. Like pilot, we changed pilots one time. Our original pilot was doing some maintenance on the plane or something, and fell off a step ladder, broke his arm, and he was a kind of a small guy, and B-24 just like driving a truck. And he just, we had to get a new pilot because he broke his arm, and there's no way you could steer this truck, B-24. So we got another pilot, and we finished our, our combat training stateside, and departed from Florida, went by way of South America and Africa, and then finally over to England, to our base. And it turned out that for some reason or other, there was some general that was looking for. He had some special new ideas about training combat crews, so he wanted to pick a group, actually form a group. And I remember when we started forming this group, that we got all brand new B-24. This is a general. He had a lot of pull, so he was able to get all brand new B-24s flying right off the factory someplace in New England. And so we had, like I said, brand new planes to fly over with. So we actually flew most planes in combat. They were just to simulate it one way or another. But we flew over as a group. When I say as a group, I mean we didn't flying formation over the Atlantic, but we all simulated though in England, and a brand new base, brand new B-24 bombers. This gentleman had a lot of pull, and he had some pet ideas about how a combat crew should be trained and whatever. So it was kind of a unique experience, because when we landed in England, why even the tarmacs or whatever, they were still wet with what do they call it? What do they call it?
Creosote?
No,
The tarmac?
Tarmac, yeah.
So I know a lot of the B-24s were painted camouflage. Were yours in...
No, for some reason or other, this general, that part of the thing was brand new B-24s, and his idea was that they would not be camouflaged, which eventually we wondered whether that was a good idea, because we were singled out, this is during combat, we were singled out a number of times. We were singled out, the German fighters kept after these shiny planes because they interpreted as a defiance. That, why do we don't have to camouflage? We're invincible or something. And so we became targets, special targets. We lost an awful lot of our B-20 in combat. Even we lost a lot of our I think toward the end there was almost none of those nice shiny silver planes. They were all shot down.
Do you remember your first mission?
Let's see. Yeah, it was. They usually go in. They try to go in with like a training mission, like a training flight or something first, and then before they really send you on a maximum range mission. So there's all part of the training, but they eventually end up in combat though. First one I think was Mulhouse in France. I remember that, and you could tell this was a new group because there was a little problem with formations and all that. But that's part of the reason why they send you on a couple of milk runs to get used to flying in combat and expect fighters to attack and all that business.
What year did you arrive in England?
Well, let's see, I'm looking at my records in 43, back 43. It was early in 44, spring of 44. I was only there a few months, or maybe a month or so before a few training missions, and then we went to combat. My crew went on 13 missions. I went on 16 because I sometimes flew as a squadron navigator in another plane or something. So I went on. We were eventually shot down. It was a 16. It was on my 16 mission.
So this was you arrived there around the lead up to D-Day. So do you have any stories about? D-Day was a sad time for me because we were all excited about the D-Day, and we had that final briefing, and got all excited. And I was a navigator on the lead squadron plane, So I felt that I was going to be really up in the front. The navigators flew before they flew they did piloter's navigation from the nose turret. See, so when we took off, our group took off, I was in the first plane in the nose. So everything else behind me. I felt like I was the leader of some kind. But unfortunately, what happened is when we took off, this was the lead plane now. With the major was the lead pilot, and we were halfway off, about 50 foot off the ground, and suddenly on takeoff. This is kind of just at night. And suddenly there was just a big bang in the shutter, and we lost an engine. This is a fully loaded bomber with a full crew, loaded with ammunition, loaded with gas, and it needed every
horsepower just to take off. And here we were taking off and maybe just a few feet off the ground, maybe 10, 20 feet or so, and blew an engine. And there I am. I'm sitting in the front position, and there's this group behind us, and our lead plane blew a cylinder and started going down a little, and just barely went off, missed the trees, and so they told the tower called us. This is the lead plane. Told us that we have to go up because we couldn't go to on D-Day. We couldn't go to Normandy because we had to get out of the way. So they told us to go up in high altitude and circle until all the planes took off, and then the job was, we were still lead plane, and so then they told us to land, and they were going to have, there's one plane left. We had all our planes off. There was one bomber that was left that was actually supposedly ready to fly, so that the plane landed with the one engine out, and we ran over this new plane with all our gear, and it didn't pass checkout. So if you ever saw grown men cry, this is the lead crew, and D-Day, and all the planes, and we were the last plane that they had available didn't check out. So, like I said, if you saw grown men cry, because all we could do was wait for the planes to come back. So that was the D-Day experience. Trying to think of any other real unusual experience. Of course, the unusual one was that we took a maximum range mission to Stettin, which is the northeast corner of Germany, which is now Poland. And that was the maximum range mission. And that was the one where we didn't come back from that one. we were coming in for the bombing run, ready for the initial point for the bombing run, and it was about 50 or 60 German fighters were waiting for someone to get a little bit away from the main group. So our lead pilot, for some reason or other, didn't make the turn fast enough, so we were suddenly out away from the big group, and then there were about 50, somebody said as many as 70 German fighters that were up in the sun. You couldn't see them. They were flying in the sun, waiting for straggling, waiting for somebody, because they didn't dare attack these couple hundred bombers with all these guns, So when they saw that our lead pilot didn't turn fast enough, we were out like sitting ducks, and they came in and wiped out the whole squadron. There wasn't a single plane got back to England. They were all shot down, and my plane, was the only one to land it, and we landed in Sweden because we were all, our one engine was completely out, the second one was partly out, and you needed all four engines just to get back to England. So so I gave them, as a navigator, I gave them a heading to Sweden to make emergency landing in Sweden. And so that was the end of my war. Landed in Sweden, and it was a question whether we'd have a problem because our landing gears were not locked, and so now when we hit it was kind of a metal mat runway. It wasn't a regular cement runway. When we hit that runway, we knew one thing was going to happen, but these wheels were flapping. It depended on where they were when we hit. If they were on the inside we hit, we were goners, We'd have just crashed and probably exploded or burned or something. But instead, we were lucky, and when we landed, the wheels held up, and that was our last flight. Now we were out of the war. We were in Sweden, neutral country, and I stayed there for. Well, our crew, we were there for about 6 months, 5-6 months in Sweden, and just reading the papers, what's going on in the war. So that was basically the end of my combat experience.
Can you tell me something about some of the instruments you used for navigation?
Oh,
What sort
well,
of tools did you use?
we had radio navigation. At night we had celestial navigation. You know, where you have to know all the stars, and it was interesting because today, well, you're into astronomy. Today, at that time, we had to have, actually in the bomber, we actually had a whole stack of books that, in order to get the reading and then interpolate the reading into these books. And imagine in the bomber having a bunch of books in the navigation compartment just to find out, find out where you're at and the headings and all that business. But today, what's it? They use the North Star.
GPS.
GPS, yeah. Well, we didn't have GPS. We just had a whole bunch of books. So that was that experience. But I was there for 6 months, and one day they just said, get backed up. We're going to try to get you out of Sweden. Sweden was a neutral country, but we were kind of in the winning end of the war at the time, so they weren't very strict about neutrality, and they were just, they were actually just turned their backs when the big B-24 came over and picked a bunch of us up and took us back by way of Scotland, back to England. So that was the end of my war in Europe, at any rate. I stayed. I became a navigation instructor before I got out of the service.
So you did your navigation instructing. You did that in the States, or?
Yeah, in the States. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't do too much of that because at my time I had the option. At that time I was married, and we had Barbara, their oldest daughter. So I figured, well, no sense in hauling my wife and kid around. I had the option to get out, so I went out and stayed in the reserves for a while.
All right, well, let's pause here for a little bit, and then we'll start up again.